So my name is Matt Bevere. I'm a ministry consultant in the Great Lakes region of the National Association of Evangelicals. As Bruce mentioned, I worked for years at Ashland Theological Seminary as an administrator and also as professor of practical theology. Retired last May, and I'd done some work with NAE in the area of immigration, and so they asked me if I would kind of serve in this role. I actually serve for NAE as a contractor. I'm not directly employed with them. I do independent contract work for them. And this is a very important issue for me, and I'm so glad that God has afforded me the opportunity to serve in this capacity in my retirement. Because over the last several years, I have become very passionate about the area of immigration. And that hasn't always been the case. And what brought me to that point is while I was working for Ashland, I held several positions in administration, and at one point I was asked to be the center director at the Cleveland location, where we had classrooms at the time. And in that capacity, I did a lot of work with area churches and community organizations, and I got to know Latino pastors and Latino congregations. And what I discovered in as those relationships grew and those friendships grew, I came to the realization of how immigration policy greatly impacts the lives of these congregations and communities. Our immigrant churches have people of mixed status, and so anytime policy changes, it will mean something different for these communities, and sometimes that can mean separation of families. And so I started to become passionate about this issue simply because of that proximity with immigrant churches that were experiencing some of what, to be quite frank before that, wasn't on my radar as an issue, right? So I hope today that we can have a little bit of discussion in between the presentation and the slides, because I do want to hear from you. This is right now in time, this is an issue that the church has to process through, and how are we going to respond to what's happening. I'm curious, though, if some of you wouldn't mind sharing just very briefly, what interested you in coming to this particular workshop? Anybody want to share that?
We've been ministering to an Honduran family for 3-4 years now, and we've watched them try to go through the process and pay out money after money after money and not get anywhere.
Yeah, and that is the experience of so many folks, especially the asylum seekers, that undocumented. Well, not even them. I mean, some of these folks have been in the process of trying to gain some legal status for 20 plus years. What else brings you here?
Well,
yes.
Similarly, I work with international people in the community, and they're very frustrated because all of the people who come in very recently have pushed them farther and farther down, so it makes it harder and harder. They're this close to being a citizen, they're paying taxes in 2 countries, whatever, and they're frustrated, and I don't know.
Yes, because I was interested to join this because the area that I'm working, there are a lot of those people who are affected from the situation, and include the church itself.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. One more. Yes.
I would say in our congregation, I think I really had to push back against the idea that immigration or any illegal is camped with rapists and murderers, and just the moral issue of clarity and clarifying, and then being told that I'll produce statistics that prove exactly the opposite, in fact that they're more law-abiding in many ways, and well, that's a George Soros idea. So just that moral component that we're missing.
Yeah, I had a pastor tell me not that long ago, Pastor in Canton, we were talking about that very issue. And he was saying that that's always his frustration, is that when he tries to bring out the facts, that it's hard for people to get past the talking points that they've heard. And just the political polarization we're involved in American society. Yes?
Yeah, that's a little bit different. We are in the Richmond, Virginia area, and in the last 2 years, we do a food ministry for our community, and the last 2 years are influx of a lot of Spanish-speaking folks in Central America and South America, where we've had to find somebody that can speak Spanish to do some translating for us. And so we're actually feeling a little bit overwhelmed,
Yep.
to be honest with you.
Yeah, and congregations are doing some interesting, a lot of congregations are experiencing that same thing, and they're doing some interesting things. For example, trying to use AI in some of the translation programs when they have folks in their congregation that don't understand English. And so congregations are trying to adapt to this new reality. And it's to me, it's just such a positive development that congregations are saying, okay, how do we minister to these folks? Yeah. Yes?
I think you touched on it earlier. I want to make a difference and I want to help,
Yeah.
but I don't understand how I obey the law or break the law. And that confuses me.
Sure. So let me say, I'm glad you raised that. So first of all, I am not an attorney, so I'm not going to give any of you legal advice on what you can and cannot do. Although I will tell you that we do events at NAU. I've done events where we have immigration attorneys present at those events, and they can answer those kinds of questions for you. You know, I avoid all of that because, quite frankly, immigration law is so complex. You can read a quick summary of something, but that doesn't mean that you really know a whole lot about what goes on in the courtroom. So, very good. Thank you for those answers. So let me give you a brief outline of what I'm going to address today. One is NAE's position on immigration. People always ask me that. Where does NAE stand? One of the things that I handed out to you is this book called For the Health of the Nation, an evangelical call to civic responsibility, and it addresses the 8 areas of civic engagement that we engage in. Protecting religious freedom and liberty of conscience, safeguarding the nature and sanctity of human life, strengthening marriages, families, and children, seeking justice and compassion for the poor and vulnerable, preserving human rights, pursuing racial justice and reconciliation, promoting just peace and restraining violence, and caring for God's creation. When you get a chance, I would encourage you to read that book. Not only does it give you our position in those areas, but it also gives you the overall theological and biblical understanding of how we engage in the civic space and why we engage in the civic space that the way we do. And it'll tell you more about us as an organization, which you as a church are a part of us. So I'm going to look at a couple of immigration myths. Some of this stuff I'm sure you all know, but I'm using some of it as a launching point into some discussion that we can have. Who is coming to the United States? What is the makeup of the folks that are coming to the U.S.? And then what is the current landscape with immigration? We all see what's going on. We're flooded in the news with what's happening. 200 plus executive orders, many of them aimed at immigrants. I will tell you as an organization, it is very hard for us to keep up with what is coming from day after day after day. And for pastors who don't work in this space, but are concerned in this space, I'm sure that you have trouble from one day to the next keeping up with what's going on. And how can we respond? And again, some discussion points. NAE's position on immigration. So a lot of our positions on immigration, we try to be balanced. We're a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates. We don't align with one side or the other. We try, in our understanding of positions, to try to be biblical and theological as best as we understand that. And so there are several points that we make in terms of our position on immigration. The first is strengthen the rule of law. All of us want a society that is orderly and is a nation of laws. But that doesn't just mean things like enforcement.
Yeah.
That means humanitarian laws. You know, Scripture teaches us, as you all know, that justice and mercy go together, that you can't separate this in Scripture. And so when we say strengthen the rule of law, we're looking at an overarching view of what it means to be a nation of laws that not only enforces laws for matters of justice, but also includes mercy in that. And what does it mean then to be a society that practices both? So we do want to see our Congress, because it's their responsibility, to implement secure and humane border enforcement. And right now, we'll talk a little bit about this in a few minutes, right now we're seeing the emphasis on secure borders. We're not seeing a whole lot when it comes to humanitarian, the humanitarian side of immigration. We do want to see a streamlined and expanded process for asylum seekers and people who want to come here as workers. The last time any meaningful immigration reform was passed was more than 40 years ago. And even then, that wasn't exactly all that. It left a lot of holes in what was passed. The immigration landscape has changed so much in the United States that the current laws do not meet the challenge of the situation. And so we want to see, and we need immigrants here, we all know this, and so we want to see the United States expand opportunities for those who want to come here and to be a part of American society and to be able to work here, raise their families. We do say that we are in favor of requiring restitution for those who have violated the law. And by the way, most immigrants are okay with that. You talk to undocumented immigrants and they say, I'm willing to pay because I violated the law. I'm willing to do what I need to do to be legal here. And a couple of you spoke to that. You know, you're working with immigrants who are trying to do they're trying to do it, but it doesn't work for them. And so we're saying, sure, you know, we're not saying, like they did in the 80s, amnesty, where we just make everybody legal, but a process in whereby they provide restitution and that they're given a process that is reasonable and clear to be able to become legal. And to provide a streamlined pathway to citizenship for those who qualify, like DACA recipients, deferred action for childhood arrival, that the executive order was given by Barack Obama, that allowed these folks who were brought here as children through no decision of their own to give them legal status. And as you know, that you can't even seem to make that decision, which seems like a no-brainer. But we believe very strongly in DACA recipients being given a pathway to citizenship. Immigration myths. First one I'm sure you've heard. Undocumented immigrants should go back to their countries and get in line like my grandparents did. So my great-grandparents came here from Italy. Back during, in the last century, at the beginning of the century, where there was a lot of political unrest in Italy, a lot of famine. There was a flooding of the grain market in Italy by cheap grain produced in the United States, and so there was a lot of hunger. And my great-grandparents came here during that time. My great-grandfather had the opportunity to go back and visit Italy when he was in his 90s. He lived to be 100. He was in his 90s, and my grandfather, his oldest son, asked him if he would like to go with them back on a trip to Italy. And his response was, why would I want to go back? When I lived there, I starved. Yeah. So the reason that this is such a problem in terms of being a myth is when my great-grandparents came, all they had to do was find passage here and then pass a very basic physical. And then they were allowed into the country. That is not true anymore. The current immigration application process no longer has a workable path for those wishing to come seeking asylum. And down at the bottom in black, there's an article, and by the way, I can send these slides out if anyone would like these slides. There is a wonderful article in the Ohio Capital Journal by Marty Schladen entitled, The Way People Think Immigration Works and the Way It Really Does. If you would like to have a nice summary of what makes our immigration process so complex, I would start with this article because it really gives you the basics. And so when you're talking to people about this myth, here is something that will give you some information that will be helpful. So there are 4 main legal pathways to gain permanent residence in the U.S. I'm going to go over this briefly. I'm just going to touch on this. And this, by the way, the next 4 slides come from Women of Welcome. Any of you familiar with the organization Women of Welcome? So one of the slides at the end is going to have resources, and they're one of the resources. I am so impressed with their organization. Their focus is to engage evangelical women in the area of immigration, and they form chapters in local areas. And I had a meeting with someone from Women of Welcome just the other day because we're talking about doing some joint ventures in terms of events. And she was saying how they're trying to offer evangelical women who have a heart for immigration a support network and an advocacy network where they live. So if that's something that interests you, I would encourage you to look them up. So there are 4 ways to get here: blood, sweat, tears, and luck. So blood. Immigrants with a close family member who is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, and by the way, lawful permanent resident is the technical term for a green card holder, can apply. Currently, this process can take more than 20 years. Now, who can apply? Close family members. That means spouse and children. And that's unlimited, the number that can apply. If you'd like to have your siblings come, you can apply for that too, but they limit the number of siblings each year that are allowed to come in. So this does not work for asylum seekers coming from Guatemala or Honduras. Because if you need to bring your family away from gang violence, for example, that's going on, you can't sit there for 20 years and wait for the process to work for you. Sweat. Some employers can sponsor immigrants, but to qualify for this, you almost always need an advanced degree or some advanced skills. Now, this is an important path to get here because we do need highly skilled workers in the United States. I used to work, years ago, I used to work in the area of workforce development, and I had IT companies tell me that finding American workers in certain IT areas was extremely difficult, and they had to have foreign workers, otherwise they couldn't fill these positions that they so desperately needed. But this obviously is only for a limited number of people in terms of people who can come in through this path. Tiers. A small percentage of those coming to the U.S., that is refugees and asylum seekers, have proven that they have fled persecution because of race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. A small percentage of these folks are actually admitted. Asylum seekers who come to the United States, only about 10% are actually given legal status. And so what happens with asylum seekers, they come to the United States, and American law says that when you claim asylum, the United States has to process you and let you in. That's American law. And so they come in. A lot of times they do have family in the United States. It's one of the reasons why they come here. And so they start the process, and it takes years. This can take, for an asylum seeker, 6 years or more. Well, what happened? Are you going to stop living life for 6 years? Of course not. So what happens? You come to the United States, you live with your family, you meet somebody, you get married, you have children. The process keeps playing out and out and out, and you go to court and they give you an extension, you go to court and they give you an extension. Next thing you know, it's been 15 years, you have teenage children, you have a job or you own a business, and then somebody wants to deport you. And finally, luck. And this is the diversity lottery. It randomly selects applicants from underrepresented countries who do not have as many nationals living in the U.S. as a particular social group. So, Morocco, for example, is one of the countries that people can apply for lottery. We admit 55,000 people a year on lottery, and that's it. I know a woman in Cleveland. She's from Morocco. And she's just a delightful human being to talk to. She's one of those cheerful people. I tell her she's sunshine in a bottle. And she is so grateful to have this stroke of luck, is what she thinks of it as, that she got to come to the United States. But again, very limited in terms of how we can get people here. Now, you can't read that, I know. All right. Cover your left eye. I can send this to you so that you can actually read it. But the reason I put it up here, this is a flow chart of the way to get a green card in the United States. Starts at the top, and depending on your status, it just keeps going down until you get to the end. That's how complex the immigration system is. And this is one of the reasons why I tell people, no, I don't answer any legal questions, because I would have no idea what to do with this. I don't sometimes think lawyers know what to do with this. So, that's our immigration system in a flow chart. Aren't you glad that's not your job description at work? Immigration myth number 2. Human migration is the exception, not the rule. This is one I really want us to think about as the church. Because I think the church is the organization in the United States, if you want to look at us as an organization, that is the best equipped to speak to this reality. That human migration is the exception, not the rule. In 2020, there were 281 million international migrants. That is 1 in 30 people worldwide are migrants. Now, if you look at the percentage, that doesn't sound like a lot. 3.6% of the world's population, that doesn't sound like a lot of people. But I want you to think about 281 million people on the move and what that means for the countries that host them. And this is a constant process. And it's expected to grow, by the way. This isn't going to slow down. If you look at 1990, there were 128 million migrants in the world. That has more than doubled. Now, granted, the world population has increased greatly too, but still, 281 million people, almost 300 million that are on the move. And so human migration is not the exception, it's the rule. And so we tend to have that assumption when people come to our border. Why are they coming here? Well, they're coming here because human migration has been around pre-biblical times.
Yeah.
And of course, what I would argue is that if you look at the Bible, migration plays such an important role in the movement of God's people as God travels with them. And I think that's why we can speak to this better than anybody else, because our story is a story of the migration of the people of God, both physically and spiritually, and we believe that we have a God that goes with us as we travel, right? That's a theological story that can resonate with people. So what are the myths about and objections to immigration that you hear in your congregation? Are there, aside from these two, there's so many of them, I know we could be here all day if we talked about that, but do you have any that come to mind quickly for you that you've heard people say? That a myth about immigration, maybe an objection to immigration?
Just the whole like, oh, they're taking jobs and I'm like, just stop, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're taking jobs, which really isn't true, right? It's not true, and it's never been true of immigrants. So when my great-grandparents came here, you look at the jobs my great-grandfather did. My great-grandfather in Cleveland, you know, the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium, for all you Browns fans who maybe went down there, that 80,000 feet, monstrous. My grandfather was on the team that built that stadium. My grandfather was on the road crews that built the brick streets in Cleveland. Immigrants have always done jobs that established Americans don't want to do. And that's true anywhere. Because what happens is we get settled, we get comfortable, we get opportunities. And so we don't want to do those really hard physical jobs. And so who does want to do those? The people who come, right? And so right now, as I'm sure that you've heard, President Trump has said that he wants to do a carve-out for farm workers and hospitality workers because restaurants and farms are basically saying to him, we don't have the workers, they're not coming now. And now whether or not they're actually going to do that carve-out, we'll see. But yeah, the idea that they're taking our jobs is just not, it's not the reality. Any others?
When you brought up the statistic about like, oh my gosh, you're just these horrible criminals in gangs.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other one, that they're all criminals. I mean, we know, and I don't have the statistics on this, but my guess is you've seen them, is how many of these folks have no criminal record whatsoever that they're rounding up, right? Because what happened was they said we're going to take off after the criminals first. Well, there weren't enough to meet the quotas that they had. And so, I mean, Border Patrol, they have 3,000 people a day as a quota. Border Patrol and ICE that they have to round up. And they go for the low-hanging fruit. And so they're going to the Home Depot, you know, where the people aren't working, and rounding them up, and they're going to the fields and so forth. So, one of the things too I think we need to talk about is just the general change of the culture, right? The diversity that is taking place in the culture and the diversity that's taking place in the church. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I mean, let's be honest, it makes them uncomfortable. We hear people say this all the time, our culture is changing. Yeah, it is.
Always has been.
It always has been, yeah. Yeah. So, who's coming? So this is as of 2023. It's changed some, but not a whole lot. I'll give you an idea. So those who are formally documented, that is, they are here legally, 37.6 million people. And they consist of naturalized citizens, lawful permanent residents or green card holders, and temporary visa holders. So people who are here on a school visa, for example, right? Or a temporary work status. So that's the majority of the people who are here that actually have documents. Some people have some protection from deportation, but still are vulnerable. That's about 4 million people. And those are people waiting asylum decisions, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because that has changed greatly. Temporary protected status, think of Haitians, for example, who have come here because of all the gang violence in Haiti. We all know the dust-up that happened during the campaign about Haitians in Springfield and the ugly rumors that were being spread about them. Those folks are here under temporary protected status. And again, DACA recipients and those who are on humanitarian parole. This is more of an individualized process as opposed to temporary protected status. So in temporary protected status, you might take a whole country like Haiti and say this group of people can come here because they're under threat. Humanitarian parole is more on an individualized case-by-case basis. And then there are those who have no protection from deportation. That's 9.7 million. As of 2023, it's higher now, somewhere between 10 and 11 million. And these are the undocumented folks. Now, I want you to look at that bottom line. In the U.S., the undocumented immigrants in the U.S. for 20 years or more, in the year 2000, it was less than 1%.
I don't understand this statistic, sorry.
Huh?
I don't understand this statistic. In the US,
Yeah.
20 plus years,
Yeah.
less than 1%. Sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah, let me explain it. I know that's a cryptic line. Probably should have found a better way to say it. So, undocumented immigrants who have been in the country for 20 years or more, back in the year 2000, it was less than 1% of the immigrant population. Today, or in 2023, it was 45%. 45% of undocumented folks are here 20 years or more. So what does that mean when they're deported, right? Children are left without an income. Children are left without parents, right? Older parents can be left without children, depending on the circumstances. And so you can see how the problem is today. So you talk about deporting undocumented in 2000. Was it a problem? Yes, but it was a much smaller problem than it is now. 45% of our folks. And if 45% of the country is in that undocumented or in that situation, and when you realize that the majority of people who come here are Christians, what does that mean for immigrant churches? Yeah, it means it can be devastating.
So you're saying that 45% came to America between 2000 and 2005, not in the last 5 years? Because if 5 years ago there was only 1%, I mean, they changed.
2020. 2000.
Can you back up to that?
Yeah, sure can.
24 years ago. So in 85, 2020 would have only been here 15 years, now they're here 20 plus. So that's gotta be more.
But the influx wasn't in the last 3 years like we all think.
No,
The
it's
influx
not.
was 20 years
Okay,
ago.
I get that. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So we hear that there's been this massive influx of immigrants over the last 3 years, right? And this has been unprecedented in our history. That is not true. I don't know if any of you did any of you go to see Mike DeBrule when he was at Malone? Yeah. So, and Mike has a wonderful slide for this. Mike was a Border Patrol chief. He retired. Now he goes around the country and he speaks to what's happening at the border. And he's got this wonderful slide that shows the number of people who crossed the border by year.
Right.
And if you look at the number who came over in the 80s, for example, it isn't much different than people coming over now. So this idea that we've had this massive influx of immigrants that happened over the last 3 years, and that is what's caused the problem, is not true. I mean, yes, more did come across, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But historically, we've had a lot of people coming across the border. The first part of the border fence was not built until into the early 1990s. There was no border fence at all before the early 90s. The border was very free-flowing, people going back and forth all the time. So there are a lot of myths, that, and you're bringing that out. There's a lot of myths that we have about this. And this statistic speaks to that. And thank you for mentioning that. So globally, Christians are the largest migrant group. 47% of international migrants are Christians. And the migrants coming across the southern border, higher percentage of Christians, because most of them are coming from Latino countries, which are highly Christian. And of course, I think we know that, you know, the church is growing in the global south, and it's declining in the global north. And so the way that American churches are growing is through immigration, which has always been true, by the way. That's not a new thing. As of the end of 2024, there were more than 10 million Christian immigrants present in the U.S. who are vulnerable to deportation. Nearly 7 million U.S. citizen Christians live within the same households as those at risk of deportation. Anybody here in a family that has somebody that might be at risk? Okay. When I ask that question in Latino churches, you know, hands go up? Everybody. 87% of DACA recipients are Christians. That is 100,000 out of 530 total DACA recipients. And those are people who came here as a child before the year 2007. DACA was not extended beyond that. And so children who are brought here now have no DACA protection. And 300,000 U.S. citizen children live with at least one parent who is a DACA recipient. Now, fortunately, the Trump administration has said, you know, that has indicated that they don't want to touch DACA recipients, which I hope that remains the case. But these people are very vulnerable, and if any of you know a DACA recipient, you talk to them, and you know they're college graduates, they serve in the military, they're nurses, they're doctors, they have families. I mean, they are Americans. They came here as children. Maybe they know the language of their parents, but most of them, their primary language is English. If they have family back in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, wherever, they generally don't know them very well. So they would be going back to what is in essence for them a foreign country if they were to be deported. The overwhelming majority of immigrants at risk of deportation are Christians. 61% are Catholic, 13% are evangelical, and then 7% other Christian groups. So we're talking 80% of people who come from the Christian faith. Now, NAE is very clear that we don't just support these policies for Christian immigrants. All are created in the image of God. So we want to see these blanket protections for everybody. But it's important for us as the church to know the demographics of our own brothers and sisters, right? And how many of us are undocumented immigrants who could be deported. As the United States navigates the complexities of the 21st century, the demographic landscape is continually evolving. One particularly interesting aspect of this change is the religious composition of the country. Despite the growing number of people born in the U.S., that identify as non-religious, immigration plays a crucial role in sustaining and shaping the church's faith. So I want to do a quick case study of the Assemblies of God, because the Assemblies of God really is, they are growing in great numbers, quite frankly, because of immigration. Latinos now comprise over 22% of adherents in the Assemblies of God. Latin American immigrants have had a major impact, especially on the Assemblies of God, says Dennis Rivera, director of the Office of Hispanic Relations. With the largest group coming from Mexico and many from Central and South America, the Assemblies of God continues to grow because of immigration and the growth of ethnic churches. So here are just some statistics. AG church attendance grew in 2024 by 6.2%. Most churches that most denominations, if they're showing growth, you're talking about 1 to 2%. And many are on the decline. Adherence from ethnic backgrounds in the Assemblies of God Church, 46.3%. Look at that amazing number. 46.3%. Ethnic minority men and women are well represented in leadership at the denominational level. So this just isn't a matter of having congregations that are ethnic minorities. Their upper leadership has included ethnic minorities in their leadership. In 2024, the Assemblies of God planted 330 churches. That's a 33.6 increase from the previous year in the Assemblies of God. And one of the things about the Assemblies of God is they have an urgency to evangelize. It's not just something seen as one thing they do, but it's seen as something that undergirds what they do in ministry. And so there's a case study here for denominations to take a look at what the Assemblies of God has done and says, okay, what do we need to do to reach out to this growing population who serve Christ and who believe in Christ? I've been at the border 3 times since September, and one of the things that always strikes me is when we talk to the asylum seekers who are coming in, they always put their journey within the narrative. I wouldn't say always. Most of the time they put their journey within the narrative of their faith. That we hope we're doing God's will by coming here. You know, we pray for a better life for our children, and they always want us to pray with them. And so you can see the faith of these people who are coming here and believe that this journey is somehow a journey that they think that God has blessed for them, and hope that they are doing what God wants them to do. The AG's diversity challenges the rest of the church to look beyond its own cultural comfort zones. As the most diverse large denomination in the U.S., the AG models a gospel that speaks to every tribe and tongue. In a divided world, that kind of unity is a powerful witness. All right, let's have a discussion on that before we talk about the current landscape. What do you see in your church? Yes?
Different question, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Back several slides, you had a list of different groups and the numbers.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand what abilities they have? So the undocumented workers, the ones that are in danger of deportation, I'm guessing can't have a driver's license, can't own property, can't vote. Where does the different, so the ones that have been granted asylum or are waiting for granting asylum, where do they fall in those areas?
Yeah, so you know, one of the big things that we hear is that you know, these folks, they get you know, they get SNAP cards and they get checks from the government, and if you're undocumented, none of that is true. When you become legal, there are some social services that are available. I can't give you a rundown, a list of those, but they're really not many. You know, they're really not many. I mean, you know, for Americans to say, oh, they're taking all of these resources. No, they're really not. And for the few resources that they sometimes take, they're putting so much back into the economy. The amount that undocumented workers, all immigrant workers, put into the economy is in the billions every year. And they pay into Social Security, they pay into taxes. So we're struggling with, you know, what to do with Social Security. It's going to be insolvent in a few years. And they always want to raise the retirement age, which, you know, for those getting close to retirement, they don't like hearing that for a good reason. And so, so that's always the answer. We'll raise the retirement age. Well, here's a couple other answers that you can give. One would be, because once you make, I want to say it's, what's the threshold for Social Security payroll, and then after that you don't pay any? It's like 160,000 or something, and after that you don't pay any Social Security. Well, why not raise that threshold? And the second thing you could do is bring in some immigrant workers. Because the biggest problem with Social Security is the ratio of workers to retirees. In 1960, the ratio was 3 workers to every 5 retirees. Now it was 4 workers to every 5 retirees. Now it's 2 workers to every 5 retirees. So if you want to make Social Security solvent, increase the workforce. And not only will they, if you give them a legal pathway and they're paying into the system, they should also be able to collect out of it, right? That's only fair. And so we have a lot of people that are paying into Social Security. They're paying payroll taxes, but they are not going to get the benefits on the back end. So that has become free money for the United States. And when we limit the number of workers that we need, when we start to have people leave the country who are workers, we are decreasing the amount of those funds that they're putting into the American economy. So regardless of, and again, I wish I could give you a clear answer once they become legal, but they don't get a lot. They're not eligible for much, but they put so much more in. So the argument that they're taking our resources, the statistics tell us just the opposite.
So, just to follow up on that, the asylum seeker who has not yet had their case resolved, they're in the court, they're extending, you talked about, do they have a legal right to hold a job in the United States?
After they're here 6 months. They have to be here 6, which is a crazy rule, right? So you come to the United States, oh, you're not allowed to work for 6 months.
So you had asked a question about what we're seeing in our church. I mean,
Yes.
I'm in a rural church in Pennsylvania, and we've found ourselves with a group of immigrants from Venezuela, and we welcome them. We actually have in-ear translators so that the ones that aren't fluent in English can understand the sermon. We do some ESL stuff. Occasionally we've done some Spanish translation in our worship songs, like a line or two here and there. Not always well received from 100% of the people, but we're pushing that envelope. But on the heels of this other conversation, you know, we've had people, we have one couple that were here seeking asylum, in the process, have hearings, paid a lot of money to their lawyer, $500 a month to their lawyer, were working legally, had papers, and now that worked until about a month or 2 ago. And now they're all of a sudden out of work. They can't work, and they can apply to have a work permit again, and like she has the date written, the exact date, and she checks her status every day to see if she's in danger of being deported.
Yeah.
But the point is that they were working. All of a sudden now that work authorization has been revoked. So what do?
Yeah.
You know, it's a very challenging situation, and they get to apply for it again. They've already paid. She said they said like $1,500 to get their first work authorization, and it was revoked.
Yeah. The goal of all this is to get them to self-deport.
Yes.
That's really what
it is very difficult to talk with these folks who are, many of them really professed a belief in Christ once they got here. They have a Catholic background, but you know, it is what it is. But they've deepened their faith since they've been in this environment, and it's really heartless way to treat people.
Yeah, the sad thing about it is they've been abused many, many times. Because most of them have been taking advantage of the Mexican mafia coming across with their coyotes.
They gotta pay all their money.
An amount of money to get here, and then when they get here, they're dropped off in a place where they don't have any way to get anyplace else, and so they have to pay. Or some of them are dropped into state of Ohio. Their families, I have a friendship with a guy that's a former FBI Homeland Security in the state of Ohio, and he was, up till he retired, he was up in top echelon in Homeland Security. And he said, so many of these people that come here, their families are taken and they're forced to drive stuff up for the Mexican mafia and the drug cartel. And if they say the wrong thing, then they're killed. And then the FBI spends, and Homeland Security spends so much time identifying bodies that they have no documentation of them ever being here, because they've been used as mules.
Yeah,
So what they do is they go in and they don't have a green card, so then they find somebody that'll employ them so they can make undercut wages where somebody else is taking advantage of them. The whole situation with the Haitians, a bunch of those people from Haiti were being transported by a Haitian dude, forced to live 50+ people in a house at a time in Springfield by a guy that was charging them exorbitant rates. So you had a literal Haitian guy that had connections that was abusing his own Haitian people to make money. And it's wild when you hear these stories.
There's so much trauma within these communities.
There's so much abuse, and it goes
it's-
all levels.
Yeah, it does. It really does. The human trafficking related to immigration
Oh, horrible.
is, and again, this is not something you can always stop completely, but if we would fix our immigration system, we could go a long way to shutting that down. It just makes sense for those who want to come here and for people who are already here, including U.S. citizens. The fact that this has not been fixed by Congress isn't excusable. And it really does, the ball does rest in Congress.
There's too much of this being made.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a couple stopped in the same time that Norbu and Bakta showed up at our church. They were from Iran, or Iraq, excuse me. One of them, they were both Kurdish. They were both here for their PhDs.
Yeah.
One at Ohio State, one at West Virginia University. They had money.
Yeah.
They had finances. But they couldn't go back because they converted. They were Christians. And they had finances, but they were literally turned down and taken advantage of by at least, I think, 3 attorneys. That they were dropping $10,000 to $20,000 a into in order for them to process them. And the attorneys just kept taking money knowing that they couldn't do anything for them.
Yeah.
And they finally fled to Canada, and they now are citizens of Canada.
It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic what's going on.
It's crazy.
I want to move on here so I can get through this before we do, but I'm curious, what else? Anything? By the way, are you Dan?
I'm Mike.
You're Mike.
I know Dan now.
Okay. I've talked to Dan. It sounded like a familiar story.
It's interesting, the big emphasis on global missions, and sometimes your global mission lands in your lap.
Yes, that's right.
Well, that's exactly right. And by the way, immigration is the way to revitalize our rural communities. Any of you that live in rural communities know that as people move out of rural communities, which is happening, we lose resources in those communities. And immigrants have revitalized. There are some case studies, they have revitalized rural communities. And so, we are, as we all say, we're a nation of immigrants, but that has what's just fueled our economy ever since the beginning. So it's really important to keep that story ahead of us. Okay, so current landscape. So I want to go through this briefly again and just tell you a little bit about where we are with these groups. So formally documented, naturalized citizens. As you know, the Trump administration, or I should say President Trump, through an executive order, did away with birthright citizenship, although he really didn't. But he wants to, and they're going to try to work that up to the Supreme Court to get rid of it. It's very doubtful that the Supreme Court will do that. But there's a reason on why they want to get rid of birthright citizenship. Because if you can get rid of that, then you can deport people who were born here. And you can do that of your own choosing, who you decide. Why am I an American citizen? I was born here. But if you take away birthright citizenship, then everybody could become vulnerable, depending on what the current administration wants to do. So the idea of getting rid of birthright citizenship really expands the ability of an administration to deport people. children of immigrants, for example, who their parents are undocumented, but the children were born here. Lawful permanent residents, green cards. There are people who are having their green cards revoked. You can have your green card revoked for a number of reasons, and one of them is moral turpitude. Now, what is moral turpitude, you ask? That's a great question. It depends on who defines it. And so there are green card holders who have already been deported, they've been caught up in the raids, and this has become a target. These folks have become a target. And temporary visa holders as well, students at our universities. Some of them have been targeted for deportation because of holding certain political views. Those who have some protections, waiting asylum decisions, there are very few people who they're not waiting any longer. I have in orange up there, CPB1. Does anybody know what the CPB1 app is?
It's an appointment for your...
Appointment. And so it was something that was used in the Biden administration where you could, someone wanting to come here could download it on their phone. They could actually schedule their appointment for asylum on the phone. And so they could arrange a time to meet Border Patrol or whoever so that they can then be processed. This actually had, now, there were problems with this app, but it also had some really positive effects. One was, you didn't have families out in the middle of the desert, right? They knew where they were because they could actually locate them through the app. The other thing it did, it really cut out a lot of the business of the cartels bringing people into the United States because they didn't need the cartels to get into the United States anymore. They had their app. What the cartels did at that point was cartels are still going to make their money. So they moved from bringing people into the country to kidnapping people on the other side and then holding them for ransom with their American relatives. And they would charge their relatives $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Otherwise, they would execute these folks, right? So the cartels found a way around it, but still, you could see there's some value in this. When the Trump administration came in, they did two things. One, they got rid of the app. It was just gone. But the other thing they did was they canceled everybody who had an appointment through the app. So all those thousands of people that had appointments, they were just waiting for those appointments to claim asylum, now no longer had appointments. At that point, they become illegal, right? Temporary protected status, these are folks like the Haitians, for example, that are here. The administration is signaling that they're going to cancel temporary protected status. And so these folks, and by the way, our Homeland Security Director, Kristi Noem, said that it's safe to go back to Haiti. That is not what the people who know Haiti are saying. DACA recipients, again, they seem to be safe for right now. Humanitarian parole, those folks are also at increased risk. And of course, the undocumented, we know about that. So the big beautiful bill, and I say that, by the way, that's what they call it in Washington. So when we go to Washington and we meet with senators and so forth, everybody's calling it the big beautiful bill up there. So that's what it's known by. $170.7 billion in additional funding for immigration. Provide a few things that you need to know about this. The first is it's provided through the reconciliation process where they only have to have a simple majority to pass it. And because of that, there's no directive from Congress on how the money is spent. So that means there's very little oversight by Congress on how the money can be spent. Once the departments get this money, they're pretty much free to just spend it how they want. And if you look at the big, beautiful bill, spending is focused on enforcement, detention, deportation. No funds are allocated for humanitarian efforts. Now, probably can't see that. But like I said, I'll send this out and you can all have it. This gives you the categories of how much is allocated for each one of the lines in immigration. So you have construction and maintenance of a border wall, Border Patrol checkpoints and facilities, $51.6 million. Border Patrol agents and vehicles, federal law enforcement training, center improvements, $7.8 billion. I'm not going to read through all of these. Enforcement and removal, including hiring ICE agents, transportation costs, and detaining families, $29.9 billion. There was one other I wanted to read real quickly. Border processing, including for unaccompanied children, remain in Mexico and expedited removal, 2.1 billion. All of the money in this bill is focused on deportation, on detaining immigrants, and border enforcement. So one of the acts that has been, have any of you heard of the Dignity Act? The reason I put this after those slides is because this was just reintroduced into Congress. If you want to do something, call your congressman, congresswomen, tell them that you support the Dignity Act. The Dignity Act was sponsored by Representative Salazar and Escobar, Republican and Democrat, both in Florida, and had in 2024 30 co-sponsors, bipartisan, one of the biggest bipartisan collaborations. I mean, 30 co-sponsors, that doesn't happen in Congress anymore. I don't know if there's still 30 co-sponsors. It didn't go anywhere in 2024. So they modified it. They took out some of the stuff that they wanted, and they've reintroduced it. And so it does address the border and asylum. It does give Dreamers permanent status. It does talk about an increased workforce, earned pathways to citizenship and permanent residence, and the whole process would pay for itself through fees and fines that those who want to become legal can pay. This is, I mean, it's not a perfect bill, but it's a good bill. And so we would like, NAE is pushing to have this passed, and so if you want to do something today, call your congressional office and say, we will support the Dignity Act. You know, and if you can get your church to say that, that's even more powerful. You know, sometimes when we go to Washington, we take letters from churches. And so a pastor will get the churches to write letters. And so we can walk in with 50 letters from one church in this congressperson's district and say, here are 50 letters of your constituency in the church that want you to understand how they feel about immigration. So they actually take notice of that, even in this very polarized climate. Okay, some of our concerns, real quick. We have 10 minutes. Due process. We are concerned about due process. And there's a lot of due process that seems to be violated. The immigration laws for due process, what exactly is required? I mean, the Constitution's clear, everybody gets due process. But the immigration laws in terms of what due process is nebulous. And so the administration will tell you they're following due process. But a lot of it doesn't seem like a lot of good due process, especially when you're deporting people that are legal and you didn't even know that they were legal. Accountability for federal law enforcement. All law enforcement, we support them. They do a job that's necessary. We appreciate their service. But like all people in power, they need to be held accountable, right? To act justly and to do mercy. And so we want accountability for federal law enforcement. Humane treatment of detainees. And I don't know, I was going to look today and I actually didn't have time, but there's one detainee, one of the things we're hearing is that a lot of the folks, they are sick, they're not getting their medicine. There is a story about one detainee in LA who is severely diabetic. She has been detained for like almost 2 months. She has not been given her medication. She lost 55 pounds. And her health was at risk. I don't know. I want to look her up and see. Hopefully they've been able to get her medication. But those are some of the stories we're hearing. And so we need humane treatment of detainees. Separation of families. Families need to be kept together. Separation of families as Christians. We know how important the family is. And so certainly separation of families is something we should oppose. And local law enforcement's cooperation with federal immigration law. One of the concerns that a lot of local law enforcement officers have when I talk to them is if they're put in a position to enforce federal immigration law, they will lose trust with the immigrant communities that they have now. And so when you have, for example, you hear stories of, say, an undocumented woman who's being sexually abused by someone in the neighborhood, and who threatens her that if you tell anybody, I'll report your status, right? So she does not want to go to local law enforcement. She needs to know that local law enforcement is not a threat to her in her undocumented status to be able to report this crime. And if federal law enforcement, if local law enforcement is forced to enforce federal law or federal immigration law, the trust that officers have will decrease. Just real quickly on refugees, I didn't talk a lot about refugees. Ukrainians, their status is being threatened here, and most of these folks are Christians. Afghans, we know the story about Afghans, and if they go back, many of them are going to be killed because they've cooperated with the U.S. in some way. And then finally, Iranian Christians. The Lautenberg Amendment, so this was done in 2006. So there's a law that allowed Jews to come from Russia because of religious persecution. And so that was expanded in 2006 to include Christians who lived in Iran and Jews who lived in Iran because of the persecution they were experiencing. The administration is saying that they are going to send those they're going to revoke their status. And if Iranian Christians are sent back to Iran, we know what will happen to them. So, there are some other things you can actually call your congressional offices about. Yeah?
Matt, you were talking about concerns, and I would just add one that I think needs to be wrestled with at a very fundamental level. In reference to, if you look at the statistics, evangelicals, by far, majority, will have supported the hardline policies of the administration. And we put this, so if you look at evangelical, I'll use that as quotes, congresspersons and whatnot, they will be on the front lines of deport them. This is what this is about. Have we done some introspections as evangelicals? Why is this happening? What are we doing that is not discipling people to see the humanitarian aspect?
Yeah, you need to. And that's a good question. By the way, I don't know if it's the next slide. Yeah. Boy, your timing is great. We didn't plan that, Jeff. So Lifeway did this survey in 2024 of evangelicals. And according to the survey, what they found was 75% of evangelicals think that undocumented persons should have a legal status and apply for citizenship. They should have a process. They do want stronger border security, 80%. They want a pathway for dreamers and legal farm workers. They want to ensure secure borders, respect the law, and be fair to taxpayers, respect the dignity of every person, and protect the family. So, my question always is with this survey, and we quote this survey a lot, how does this square with a lot of the support that we hear from evangelical churches for some of these harsher policies? You know, part of the problem is the use of the word evangelical. I mean, it's like, you know, depending on who you talk to, evangelical means something else. It's like trying to pick up a greased watermelon. What does the word mean? And so I think what's important for denominations like the evangelical Friends who bear the word in your name, sort through this, right? We do this as a National Association of Evangelicals, you know. We want to project what we think embodies the best of what it means to be an evangelical, right? And so you have to wrestle with it. It's an important question. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to skip this question. I want to give you a few just advocacy tools and resources. This is really the pathway. This is what I think of when I think of the work I do. That we want to take people from apathy to awareness. That was me 15 years ago when this wasn't on my radar. And then I became aware. And once I really became aware, I had to do something to take action and to do some kind of an advocacy. So part of the question, Jeff, that you're answering, how do you raise people to awareness, right? And let me give you an idea. So, we need to tell a better story. Ask people in your congregation, do you know immigrants and their stories? And how much do you interact with immigrant congregations? There are immigrant congregations in the Evangelical Friends, right? Some of you share buildings, right? And some of them have separate buildings they need to. As a denomination, how do you share together in the work and share in a mutual sense of understanding and what those congregations go through. In your community, in your denomination. And how do we create proximity? Proximity has become a buzzword in immigration advocacy. And I hope that we keep the word and we don't let it become cliche. Because proximity is really important. And one of the things that we do at NAE is we bring people into proximity with immigrants so that they can start to question some of the assumptions that they have about immigrants, about them being all illegal. We do border trips, for example. We take people to the border. I am willing to come to anybody's church at any time and talk about immigration. And I'll bring some immigrants with me to tell their story. We do immersion trips. If we're doing something on Monday, for the first time at NAE in Cleveland, we're doing it in Cleveland. So we talked about, we take folks to the border, but then we say, well, what about beyond the border? I mean, people, they come to the border, but then they go to someplace in the interior and they live there. And then they go to church and they raise families and they're part of their communities and they have jobs. So what about letting people see that kind of environment? I mean, we live in a country where people have immigrants that live in their neighborhoods and they don't know them, right? So we're doing something on Monday with a church here in Canton, actually. We're having 9 leaders from that church come with us. We're going up to Cleveland. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to meet with a Haitian pastor and his wife and one of the members of their church. 90% of his church is undocumented. 90%. And so they are willing to meet with this group of Christians, tell them their story, and answer their questions. Then we're going to go from there to the Hope Center. Any of you know the Hope Center in Cleveland on the west side? Yeah. It's part of Building Hope in the city. Yeah. The Hope Center is their refugee support service. They do incredible work. And I work a lot with their director, Sharon Hughes, to do events. And what we're doing is we're bringing those folks to the Hope Center. They're going to meet with an immigration lawyer who's going to talk to them about the complicated chart that I showed you. They're going to meet with a Latino pastor who actually worked for Homeland Security, and he worked with ICE. And since he was bilingual, his job, he worked for them back in the Obama administration. His job was to talk to children when they were separated from their parents. And he had such a crisis of faith over this that he left that job, became a pastor, and now he pastors a lot of immigrants. He does a lot of good work in Cleveland, and he's being harassed by people in the community. So he's going to talk to these folks about what it's like to be in this position working for Homeland Security and just the human drama he experienced. And then we're going to, Hope Center has something they call One World Kitchen, which is a culinary entrepreneurship program for refugees. And so the people who work in the program are actually going to cook us lunch, and then they're going to eat with us and tell us their stories, right? And we'll get to ask them questions. And then we're going to leave from there. We're going to go to Global Cleveland. And Global Cleveland's work in downtown Cleveland revolves around helping newcomers as they come into the city establish themselves in jobs and economically, and they will tell us, among other things, how much immigrants bring to the economic vitality of Northeast Ohio. And then we're going to debrief with the group and find out what they learned, how they've changed their opinions, and so forth. So if you're interested in doing something like that, let me know. We can arrange it. Proximity is really what we need to do. We don't change people's minds by the brilliance of our arguments, as smart as we all might be. We change their minds if we change their experience. And the way to change their experience is to bring them into proximity with people. The reason a lot of people have these opinions they do is not only because of the polarization of our media, but because they just don't know anybody.
Yeah.
Right? So, I'm going to be done. I see if we have any questions, but if you want to do more through us, there's a QR code on here that will take you to our Take Action page at NAE. And if you want to talk to me more directly about what we can do and how we can partner with you, I am more than willing to have that conversation. I do have my card up here. If you would like to take one and would like to send me an email, we can talk about future endeavors. So, I know we're done. We have time for a question or two or not.
Sure. Whatever they want to say.
Yes?
I would just say, like, one of the things, awareness, several years ago, I'm sorry, Bruce, I don't remember her name.
Bethany. She worked at Hope for the City, yeah.
Came in and led a session about this.
Yes.
And it was the first time that I really understood the difficulties of immigration, like applying for, and so that set an awareness in me, just to like, there's probably more here than I realized. Yeah, I had apathy before that.
Yeah, it is. By the way, real quick, this is a report called One Part of the Body. You can get this as a PDF on the NAE website. This was put together by us and World Relief and the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, as well as the Catholic Council of Bishops. This talks about the impact on Christian families in the church, about when it comes to immigration. So,